After his successful siege of Arta, Ioannes Komnenos made the decision that once sufficient money and workers were available, to disassemble the castle and instead use the materials to expand the town. Leaving some of the survivors of the attack as a garrison, Ioannes quickly pushed his troops north to secure the rebel regions there before the Hungarians attempt to do so. Meanwhile, in the east, Alexios Ducas believed that his army was finally large enough to risk starting a war against the Seljuk Empire and start reclaiming Asia Minor for the Empire once more. His first target was the large trading town of Iconion, laying close to the borders between the Roman Empire and the Seljuks. Despite being his first major expedition, Alexios looked forward to coming face to face with the Empire's old foe. Unlike his cousin who dreamt of restoring the Empire, Alexios wanted the glory and honour that would be his after defeating the Seljuks. Hello everyone, I am your host Warrior Angel. Welcome back to the Phoenix Rises. Now you would have saw in the last episode, Ioannes managed to capture the city of Arta, his first military victory of the campaign so far. And after thinking about it, I decided that with Arta I'm going to change it over to a town instead of keeping it as a castle. Mainly because I've already got a number of castles in the area, and a town will give me more money in the long run. Fortunately it's going to cost me 4,000 florins to try and convert it, so it's something I'm just going to have to keep in mind for a later turn. Instead though, I'm going to use the money from the mustering hall in order to upgrade Cuillin slightly. Now, Cuillin is a higher tier castle with access to better recruitment buildings, which will give me better units. So I decided to go with a garrison quarters, which as you can see here, gives me quite a few more units to pick from. And from there then I'll be able to eventually continue to upgrade Cuillin, as well as maybe one of the other ones such as Iconion, in order to get the army necessary for Ioannes to head into the west. Now, going back to Ioannes, he decides I'm going to send him up to Sofia, up in the north, to try and take the rebel province before the Hungarians get involved. Fortunately, I'm going to have to leave a garrison, which I decided to use this particular unit as scoutatory, mainly because after the losses are suffered in the siege of Arta, where the siege tower actually got destroyed, I decided to keep them there as a garrison, and then send the rest of the army up north towards Sofia. As you can see, the public order is a little bit disillusioned, but still relatively steady, and should hopefully remain to do so once the religion and that decides to get up. I also got a couple of units that were supposed to be reinforcing the army, and finally now managed to get them up, including a group of aquitaine units, which are quite good skirmishers in my opinion, if you can get them to work, that is. So by reminding him that he's heading up north towards Sofia, I've got that's everything pretty much done for this side of the map. I do have a Venetian diplomat which seems to be heading towards Retaliation, so something to keep in mind in case they offer me an alliance later. Back in the centre now, I can see that I've got a Kievan Rus diplomat from the Grand Duchy of Kiev up in the north. They would be a useful trade partner since I have no intention again of heading into that far north. So in order to try and talk to him, I send my diplomat Vakos here to go down and speak to him. I'm hoping to at least try and get trade from him if nothing else, because hopefully then that would be handy. So having a look then, I can see that they're quite amenable to me, as well as sharing the same orthodox faith as myself, which will put me in good stead. So after thinking about it for a minute, I decided to go with the standard thing I'm going to try and do, which is go for alliance, a trader rights, and I want map information in return, just so I can have an idea of what's going on. Thankfully though, they had no complaints about it. They accepted it with no problems, and you can see their region in the map there now. And not only that, got an outstanding relationship with them now. But yes, going back to the map thing, as you can see, we are up in the north though, right above my small little village of Kaffa, which, if I pop on it now actually, okay, maybe not now then, I can see that it's managed to be upgraded. I can actually upgrade it now to a town, which is because I need to have 800 florins, which, yet again, is something I don't quite have at the moment. Up in the north now, my diplomat Theophorus has the opportunity to negotiate with several different factions at this turn, either the Polish or the Hungarians. Now both factions I would like to become allied with, or at least get trade rights with, but the Hungarians are going to be my main priority. Although the Hungarians aren't going anywhere, so I decide instead to take advantage and go straight for the Polish diplomats that are currently there. Now again, I'm going to go for the very basic thing. Alliance, trade rights, as well as having map information in return. I thought it was quite a balanced deal, but unfortunately it was rejected. They wanted me to pay 250 florins per turn for 2 turns. Not that bad a deal, admittedly, but I wanted to try and do a little bit better than that. So I decided to make them a counter-offer. Instead of giving them 250 for 2 turns, I was happy just to try and give them 250 for 1 turn. So after going ahead then and making the offer, as you can see then, they just accepted it, and apparently I should be quite thankful for that. But I can now see what the Polish lands are like in the bottom of the map. And it's the Hungarians that I'm concerned about mainly, simply because they're the ones bordering the actual lands of the Empire. But having the Polish as allies will no doubt prove to be quite useful in the future. Back in the east now, it's time to bring Alexios Doukas' army together, finally. It has taken a little while, and I'm going to have to try and sort out the military situation in the east a bit better, as I haven't got that many high-level garrison, recruitment buildings, I should say, for me to be able to build quite a strong army. So at the moment, it consists mainly of Courtator units as well as Toxite and Aquitae units. But nevertheless, it should be useful enough to, at least for the first stretch of the expansion east, something that Alexios has been looking forward to for quite some time. His main target is going to be the large town you can see on your right, the town of Iconion. It's quite a large trading centre, and should hopefully prove a useful addition to the Empire once I finally get over there. I'm going to look though and see it's going to take roughly a year, or 2 turns, however you want to look at it, in order to try and get the army over there. Firstly, I think it's a bit long, but that's one of the things involving medieval total war sometimes. It could have been worse, it could have been a year. I also decided to send a bishop over to use him as a spy, to do the same thing like I did on the west. By getting him close to the settlement, I will be able to see what the Seljuk's have as a garrison in the castle. In the town, sorry. And not only that, it will allow me to start converting the populace over to the Orthodox faith as well, which is going to be proved quite handy. So finally now it's just a case of finishing up a little bit with a couple of things, ensuring that my fleet gets together. As I said, I have a strange feeling that proves to be quite useful in the end, and by moving the fleet there. Finally though, in the far west, we got Demetrius, who is continuing to make his way over to try and find new merchandise to sell. I decided, after thinking about it, to, instead of sending him off to Spain, I sent him to the African coast, because I remembered that there was a couple of useful resources, including silver, and somewhere around there it was actually gold. There we go, gold. Which is going to be really a lot of money coming in, and should hopefully be a good addition to the Empire. Once he arrives, of course, which will take a couple of years to do. During the Republic of Venice's turn, one of their diplomats approached me at Retaliation with an offer for a trade agreement between their factions. Now this was an interesting offer in my mind, considering that they're going to be one of the factions I have to eliminate for this campaign. But I thought there's no harm in taking their money for the moment. But I wanted a bit more. I wanted map information from them, so eventually I have an idea what their territory looks like for when I want to take it from them. So I made the offer with the demand for map information in return, and it was just barely accepted. But at the end of the day, it didn't bother me in the slightest. I got what I wanted, which was the most important thing, I guess. On the start of the next turn, I get offered to have a Theologians Guild be built in Constantinople. It's 1,000 florins, but I thought it'd be quite a handy thing to have, as it will increase the payity of my priests, which will hopefully put them in good stead in their jobs, particularly trying to convert the populace over in the east, as the Islamic faith is quite strong over there, and I'll need to get it converted over to the Orthodox faith. It's also nice to see a couple of achievements of the Empire. According to the end of term report, so far the Empire is #1 in the world for both production and for population, as well as being considered the most advanced faction at this moment in time. It's always nice to see the achievements of the Empire be recognised by the world. There's a couple of faction announcements, including a couple of tunes expanding, which allows me to get cheaper infantry, as well as increasing the authority of my Emperor, Basilius Alexios, at the moment. And finally, a mustering hall has been built in Retaliation, which is quite important to its proximity to the border between the Venetian lands and the Empire. With Alexios' army, I was trying to do a cunning plan, which unfortunately didn't work out. I was going to try and make it look like he was going to attack that northern town of Ankara, and try and draw the enemy forces to garrison the town, and then instead swoop on down south to attack Iconion. Unfortunately, the plan didn't work, because, well, the Seljuk's didn't do anything. So that plan went out the window, and I just went ahead and attacked Iconium in the end. And as part of the plan, I was going to send this Iconion unit to try and siege Ankara, and try and hold the enemy back to stop them from rushing out to try and reinforce the south. But again, it didn't work out that way. Oh well. Finally now up in Kaffa, I get the opportunity to upgrade it from the small village that it is up to a town by building a wooden palisade. Although I'm not really sure how building a wooden palisade would help it in real life. But by building up to a town, it allows me to deal with the religious issues that are causing so much public order problems. By building a small Orthodox church, I'll be able to convert the populace over to the true faith. And back in the northern lands there, my diplomat, Theophorus, is going to enter into negotiations with the Hungarians. It's important for me to secure this alliance because not only does it give me more money, but once I capture those rebel lands, the Hungarians are going to be on my northern borders, and I don't want them coming down south to try and attack the empire, while the main armies are going to be trying to recapture the lost lands. So, thankfully they accepted, even though I asked for map information on top of my offer for an alliance. So it improved my relationship with them as well as secured my northern borders, at least for the meantime. Over in the west now, Ioannes continues to send his army north towards Sofia. It will take another year of travel, or 2 more turns, but once he arrives I can then lead siege to the castle and hopefully have another military victory and reclaim the land once more for the Roman Empire. In Thessalonica, I also take the opportunity to build up a brothel, which would allow me to recruit spies once it's done. I always find them quite handy for the grand campaign, including not only to find intelligence, but also for opening up the gates. And finally then, I just take an opportunity to go through some of the towns and castles to try and find any useful units for me to be able to recruit. However, there isn't that many available at the moment, and the fact that I have little money didn't help the situation, so I just got what I can before ending the turn. At the start of the turn, Ioannes is actually presented with a possible new bride, Olympia. Seems like a very nice girl, and after thinking about it, I was tempted to let him dismiss this one yet again so he can have a foreign princess, but I thought in order to secure the lineage, I would decide to accept it instead. To my dear sister Anna, it was a shame to find they were unable to attend my wedding last month. Father gave you excuses and said you were inflicted with a sudden illness, but we both know the truth, although I wish it wasn't the case. I truly wish that things were different between us, sister, but until you stop blaming me for Father's choice and me becoming emperor instead of Nicephorus upon his death, there will always be a distance between us. I pray that you will someday realise that, and we can someday be as close as we were as children. One day, I will have to introduce you to Olympia, a lovely girl whose company I've come to enjoy. Both Theodore and Isaac have met her, and they already love her, and Olympia enjoys their company too. Maybe one day she'll enjoy yours as well. Your brother, Ioannes. As you can see, Anna decided not to attend the wedding. It's down to historical accuracy, because at the time Anna was not happy with the fact that Ioannes would have become the emperor instead of her husband. But in order to offset the family problems, we do have a new younger son join the family, Gennadios, who as you can see is the younger brother of the Eastern general Alexios. It would be interesting to see how the relationship develops, especially given the big age gap between the two. After the marriage celebrations, Ioannes continues to send his army north towards Sofia. Fortunately, unable to make it this turn, no doubt due to celebrating such a grand occasion as the co-emperor's wedding. So it just means that he will lay siege in the following turn and then be able to attack the turn after that. Over in the east now, Alexios decides to check to see if his deception worked, and let the Seljuk's fortify the northern town of Ankara, leaving the southern town of Iconium available for his attack. Fortunately, the bishop reports that the deception failed, and Alexios decides he's going to go for his prize, for the glory, and lays siege now to the town of Iconium. After taking the opportunity then to build up a couple of siege towers and ladders, you found that it was a nice little surprise. You managed to capture the Seljuk's unaware and left Iconium with a very small garrison of only 3 units, including a general of the Seljuks. Now, assuming that there's no reinforcements coming in from the rest of the Seljuk Empire, this will be an easy first conquest for Alexios. Back in the centre of Constantinople, the Emperor himself, Alexios, takes his rank in guard and calls upon reinforcements from Adrianople, including his son-in-law Nicephorus, in an attempt to try and deal with the rebels that have been marching through the land. Heading slightly to the north now, you can see they've been hiding in the forest, and will be ready to attack them in the following turn. With nothing else then decided to do then, I decided to end the turn here. and watch as my merchant decides to try and continues making his way towards the Silk Roads. During the end turn sequence, I was quite surprised to find that the Fatimid Caliphate had decided to attack my ports with no provocation. This is something that's going to have some retribution against. As well as that, the Seljuk Empire has continued to try and move some of the units around. I was expecting, given this army here, that they were going to try and attack the castle at Trebizond, but surprisingly they've left it alone. Maybe they're unable to make it through the mountains to try and to attack the settlement. I have no idea. We'll have to see whether or not it'll be able to stand until the rest of the empire catches up. They also sent this large army heading towards Iconion. Unfortunately, it seems like they won't be able to make it in time, because next turn I'll be able to invade and capture it for myself. During the next phase, then the Emperor Alexios attacks the rebels that are currently harassing the region. As you can see, the balance of power, I should say, is very much in my favour. I do outnumber them over 2 to 1, roughly, even though they, well, not quite 2 to 1, I should say. But I have the superior troops, and especially with 2 Emperor units and a higher level command for attempting a night attack with Alexios. Unfortunately, even though it was a clean victory, I lost more men than I was honestly expecting to, especially from the Varangian Guard. But unfortunately, that is the life of a soldier, and more importantly, now the rebels are finally eliminated from the region, which is quite nice. They weren't obviously doing anything that bad, but at the same time, I'm glad I managed to get rid of them in the end. What matter now is to try and get the troops back to their respective starting locations, Constantinople and Adrianople. The next order of business was to deal with the Fatimid Caliphate, whose navies decided to blockade several of my ports, including that at Athens and Gadax. Fortunately, though, I had a fleet in the region, so their opportunity was to try and relieve the blockade at Gadax. And as you can see, the balance of power is very much in my favour, and I was quite surprised to see that they've only had 46 men in comparison to my 151. So I decided to automatically resolve the battle, as you can't fight them in this game. And even though it was a clean victory, it didn't sink any of the ships, so fortunately it meant that their ship was able to retreat. And despite my best attempts to chase after them, unfortunately I was able to find them in the fog of war. Over in the west, Ioannes finally lay siege to Sofia, building several siege towers and ladders just in case the towers get destroyed this time. Looking at the garrison, I saw they had a lot of archers, which made us quite possibly likely that to happen. But hopefully, that once I eliminate the archers, their melee troops are going to be no problem against my far superior army. Over in the east now, Alexios Doukas finally has the siege equipment necessary to start an attack against Iconium, which he decides to do so, using a combination of siege towers and ladders to scale the walls. Looking at the balance of power though, it's very much in my favour, helped by the fact that I outnumber the opponent almost 6 to 1, despite their higher grasp of command, so I decided to auto-resolve the battle, and as you can see I only lost 73 men, which was pretty handy. Looking at the options though for the town, I was tempted to go for the exterminating populace option, especially given the big culture difference between the Orthodox and the Islamic faith. I thought they would be best, but going with the more chivalric nature of Alexios Doukas, I decided instead to occupy the town, despite the fact this is going to lead, in the short term at least, to big problems regarding public order and converting the populace over to the Orthodox faith. Look Leo, I know that capturing Iconium was easier than anyone expected, but I can't shake that feeling that it's going to be a lot harder to keep it. Not only is there that large Turk army barely 2 days march from the town, but we have to deal with the locals as well. And after all that trouble in the marketplace 2 days ago, it's meant more time spent patrolling and keeping the peace than I'd like. Let's hope the garrison arrive in the town soon. I'm looking forward to getting back on the march again, instead of mother cuddling these locals. Let the other guards deal with having to keep the locals in check. Just give me my sword and an enemy to stick it into, and I'll be happy. In order to try and deal with the public order down to religious differences, my first thing I decided to build was a small Orthodox church to try and convert the populace over to the true faith. Unfortunately for me though, I thought that I was able to repair the walls, I should say, at the same time like it is in some of the other Total War games. So unfortunately that didn't take place though, and I have to wait for the church to be built before the walls can be repaired. Fortunately though, I don't think the Turks will be willing to try and take out Iconium and the garrison force within. Although, given their position now, it's unfortunate now for my intended garrison force to take over the guardianship of Iconion. which means I'm going to have to consider using Alexios to head straight out and attack the nearby army, allowing me then to bring in the garrison force to relieve him. Over in the west, my merchant Demetrios has heard rumours about silver mines going in the south, and even though there were 356 florins per year, or 178 per turn, he decides instead to follow his hunch and go further south towards the gold mines he's heard so much about. Back at Constantinople then as well, my diplomat Vakos, who's been responsible for my alliance with the Grand Duchy of Kiev, has been ordered to go up into the far cold north of Norway and Denmark to try and secure trade agreements or even an alliance with these northern factions. Given their position, there won't be any threat to the Roman Empire during their reclamation, and it would be useful to have them as an ally. Finally, then back in the east, Monofas, the bishop, has decided to settle down for the moment in Iconion, hoping to be able to spread the true faith to the people once more. And given that then, I decided to end the turn, and we'll see what happens next. At the start of the new turn now, Alexios Doukas happens to have a new candidate for adoption, Matachios Sidonius. Unfortunately though, looking at his stats, he wasn't really anything special to consider keeping, so I decided to reject his offer. The Council of Nobles offered me 2,000 florins if I'm able to capture the rebel settlement of Scopia, which is pretty good as that's going to be Ioannes' next target after Sofia, and having the extra 2,000 florins will be a nice little touch for me. Unfortunately though, there's also a death in the family. Anna Dalsinos, the Emperor's mother, has finally died from old age, which is a shame as she's been around for quite a while according to the family tree. The rest of the family, then Alexios Doukas, has been given the rank of Strategos of Iconion, as well as the Megas Logaphatus, who increases the public order in the region, which is a nice little touch for Iconion at the moment. Unfortunately, he's more of a general rather than a governor, so I may have to consider giving that honour to someone else in the future. Up in the north now, Kaffa has finally been upgraded to a town, which allows me to deal with the public order issue of religious unrest in the region. As you can see, the Orthodox faith is still a minority faith in the area, and so to try and deal with this, I decided then to build a small Orthodox church in order to try and start converting the populace over to the true Orthodox faith. Thessalonica has also had a brothel being built, which is great now it can recruit spies. This will be handy in the western expansion, especially when it comes to trying to deal with some of the castles, and it will save me having to deal with the siege battles. Finally then, Ioannes can actually start the attack against Sofia to try and capture the castle. Balance of power is very much in my favour, even though the enemy now has an overwhelming archery advantage. My better troops should hopefully be able to secure the day. So let's see what goes on onto the battlefield. As the battle begins now, Ioannes gives the order to advance, and my troops start pushing their siege equipment towards the wall. My plan is for them to scale the walls, attack the archers currently stationed on them, and once they fall to my superior fighting ability, to capture the gate and start bringing in the heavy troops, which should prove deadly effective against the weaker melee troops that are currently stationed in the centre. Then deciding as well to start bringing in my Toxite units and my mounted cavalry in order to try and provide some support and fire against the archers on the wall. As my army reaches the wall, I was met with a familiar sight from the last battle. As you can see, the enemy has managed to set one of my towers alight, and rather than do what I did last time, which was try to rush my unit up the tower onto the walls before it broke down, I tend to send my Spaffari unit back towards the second line. Means I'm not going to get involved in the fight on the battlements, but I have faith in my spearmen to be able to carry on the job instead. As I look over the rest of my units though, I've noticed that my Acrotate unit finally make it onto the wall. As you can see, they are slightly better in hand-to-hand combat thanks to having a shield in that than the enemy levy archers, and hopefully once I push them back, especially with the aid of the nearby spearmen, they will be in a prime position to deal with any potential enemy counterattack from the centre. The Scouter unit has managed to make its way onto the wall as well, and facing some Bulgarian brigades. And as you can see, the numbers of the brigades are going down quite dramatically. My Scouter are really good, generally, and against missile troops are even better. As my units finally make it onto the wall though, you can see now the battle is now going in my favour, with the archery units actually trying to retreat and head towards the centre of the settlement. Hopefully then, that puts them onto the defensive. I'll be able to claim the back gateway and be able to bring my own troops in. As you can see now, my soldiers have managed to capture the gateway and the walls, which gives me a chance now to bring in the second line to try and deal with the enemy as well. Originally I was going to try and bring in the Scholarii, but I wanted instead to try and bring all my spearmen down on towards the thing, to the ground. I mean, unfortunately though, I'm still used to be able to play on Rome 2 in that, which means I could, for some reason, maybe down to the boundary issue, I couldn't do it. So instead I bring in my unit of spearmen originally on the second line, before bringing in both my units of Scholarii to try and deal with the Slav levies currently stationed near the gate. And then try to use the Aquitae unit, which is currently on the wall, to try and deal with the remaining units, well, remaining brigades, I should say. Unfortunately, I think they seem to have bugged up when it comes to their movement, since the unit was scattered around everywhere. There's people on the walls, down on the floor, still climbing up the ladder. There's even units trying to make their way through the gatehouse. So, unfortunately, they're not going to be much use for me for the near future until they sort themselves out. But instead, the Scholarii now, who, after the last battle, I admit, I was not really impressed with their track record, shall we say. You know, they didn't do that good until the very last battle of the turn, so I decided to try and give them a second chance to redeem themselves. And so, charging through the gateway now, they decided, lances up high, they charge into the Slav levies, or at least that was my intention before the archers decided to get in the way a bit. As you can see, then they charge in, and the charge again was not the best. It was not what I was wanting. They kill enough levy archers, admittedly, but still I was expecting them to do a lot better considering the charge. But then I was quite surprised by the enemy's next move. They decided to bring all their skirmisher cav, which I think was 2 or 3 units, in an all-out charge against my Scholarii troops. Now, I was tempted to try and bring some spearmen into support, but this isn't like Attila and Rome 2, so I've had to rely on my heavy cavalry to do the job. Fortunately though, when you're talking about skirmishing cav against heavy cavalry, there's only one outcome really, and that is with the heavy cavalry being victors. My Aquitae unit finally managed to get around to trying to deal with the brigades, which has taken a sweet ass time to do it. And as well as that, I started to try and bring in more and more troops to support the on the ground, I should say, to support the advancing towards the town centre. A bit later on, as you can see, my Scholarii have managed to slaughter a lot of the enemy skirmisher cav, leaving roughly 15 men left out of a beginning number of 240, and suffering very few losses of their own. While the Scholarii continued to try and slaughter their way through the cavalry and open the way towards the centre, I tried to put my troops into a more advantageous position for the final attack. As you can see, I've started to send my bodyguard, yellow by Ioannes, as well as 2 units of spearmen around the flank to try and attack them from the behind. Unfortunately though, their pathfinding skills can sometimes leave a little bit left, more to be desired, but they've managed to make their way over eventually. Eventually, that is. Back in the centre attack, I decided I'm going to try and give my Scholarii a slight break and try and bring them around the flanks as well. So I tell them to retreat from the major battle in the beginning and send my Scoutator unit towards the centre to try and deal with the remaining cavalry units. The Scholarii haven't exactly left much in the centre for me spearmen to deal with, but every little bit helps. In order to try and eliminate a couple of them, I also use my Aquitae unit to try and use the spears, or javelins I should say. Unfortunately, I don't exactly have much in the centre, as you can see, to deal with. And what is there will soon die pretty quickly under the javelin attack. Later on then, my Scholarii have started to try and come around the flanks to try and attack the enemy in the centre from behind. But the right-hand flanking attack has gone to a bit of a standstill. The enemy has sent some peasant infantry to try and deal with the flanking troops. Unfortunately, when you put peasant infantry against a heavily armed bodyguard unit, like the Thanatoi, you haven't really got much of a chance for the infantry anyway, especially when they've got some spearmen behind which are better than its average to try and deal with them as well. So in the centre now, my Scotatoi has managed to bring in the charge, and I started to bring my other unit of spearmen around to the flank to try and be able to attack them from the side as well, which is a bit overkill at this point. They've really only got that enemy unit left, as well the Slav levies, as well as the peasant infantry that are getting slaughtered by my general and his bodyguard. But sometimes you want to have overkill for shits and giggles, and so with that, the spearmen start the attack and start working their way through this levies. My Aquitaine unit continued to try and attack them and throw their javelins over my troops. And as you can see now, my Scloria are now in a prime position, especially now with the general dead, to be able to try and finish them off. I did try to send a unit of my Scloria to try and deal with the peasants' infantry, but as you can see they started to break, no doubt scared by the thundering of hoofsteps behind them, expecting a charge. So Ioannes and his bodyguard try to wipe out the remaining infantry before they get to that square in the centre, which will cause them to rally. Not that I'm really concerned if they rally, because after all they're only peasant infantry, but I might as well try and get rid of them when I get the opportunity. With a devastating charge now, Ioannes and his bodyguard lead the final assault against the levies fighting in the centre, killing many with their first charge. As you can imagine, with that sort of odds facing them, the levies have no real chance, and in fact my advantage is so high that I've managed to take control of the castle from them. So it's just a case now of hoping I don't kill too many thanks to my own friendly fire, and trying to slaughter all the levies as quickly as possible. So to speed this up slightly, I speed up time. But the Scloria are now attacking as well. Victory is no doubtly mine, and the castle mine. I only managed to lose 104 casualties, and in return managed to kill 742 and to capture 213. It's unfortunate though that as rebels, I don't get the chance to ransom them because of the fact that, well, they have no one to pay for it, so they will be killed. I would like to have it that as the Romans, I had the opportunity to enslave them instead. Now, slavery was very much a thing of theirs even back then. Unfortunately, I can't do that, so it means that these prisoners are going to be killed. After capturing the castle, Ioannes decides to occupy the settlement, keeping in mind with his chivalric nature, and decides what to do with regards to public order. I have a look and notice that the Orthodox faith is a minority in the region, no doubt thanks to my Hungarian allies trying to spread the Catholic faith through the region with their priests. So to try and combat that, I decided to build a small chapel to try and convert people back over to the Orthodox faith. Up in the far north, my diplomat Theophorus has been trying to find the Lithuanians, and randomly come across their capital in the middle of nowhere thanks to the fog of war. So, with the Lithuanians, I didn't want a proper alliance with them, I was just interested in trade rights and map information, as I already got two allies in the Hungarians and Polish to act as a buffer between them and my lands. So I decided to make them this offer, and they want 690 florins in return. I decided to accept it. After all, I got a bit of cash, and the trade should hopefully give me a nice little bit of income. I was interested to see whether or not a alliance could be made, as it's always nice to have an extra friend. Unfortunately, it was a demanding proposition, and it was rejected by the Lithuanians. But I got the trade agreement that I wanted, and there's a Novgorodian princess nearby that will hopefully be able to speak to regarding a trade alliance with them as well. During the Seljuk Empire's turn, I was quite surprised to see that their Grand Army, instead of heading down to try and lay siege to Iconion, decides instead to try and take out the garrison force that was on its way to reinforce the town. Unfortunately though, there was no way I'm going to be able to try and take out those many people with only 3 units. That gave me an opportunity to see what the enemy actually had. A couple of spear militia, but mainly a lot of these horse archer units, which I personally find quite annoying to deal with, especially when using an infantry based army like I've been doing so far with the Roman troops. So given the odds of the battle, I decided instead to retreat. Unfortunately, they didn't retreat far enough, and so the Seljuks the Turks I should say, decided to attack the army yet again. Now, with no opportunity now to retreat again, I have no choice but to really just auto-resolve the battle and hope I didn't lose too many men. I did lose 1 unit, and the rest of them decided to retreat back into my lands, so hopefully I can try and get them back either into Iconion or into another place to try and replenish the troops. I did have the unfortunate thing now that the Turks have actually left Iconion completely, and instead are bringing all their armies now towards my lands. Which is going to leave Alexios with a difficult decision of either to stay where he is and try and settle the population of Iconion, or send his troops in order to try and deal with the Seljuk Empire's armies heading into Roman lands. The last thing we're going to do for this episode now is to consider this possible candidate for adoption. Amintus has written to Alexios asking him to consider adopting him into the royal family, and as you can see, he would eventually make a pretty good governor. I'm quite interested in this particular trait, Active Builder, which allows him to have cheaper buildings, as well as improve the squalor in the town in which he's a governor. So after thinking about it, I decided to accept him into the royal family, and plan to put him in Iconion. Now as we go through the rest of the faction announcements, I decided to bring this episode to a close now, guys. So, as a recap now, in the west, Ioannes has done pretty well. He's managed to capture Sofia, and he only has the last rebel settlement of Scopia to capture, before he's free to lead the expedition into the west in order to try and claim the former Western Roman lands, like Belisarius did for Justinian all those years ago. Over in the east, though, Alexios is going to have to go back and deal with our Turkish army before it does too much damage to the Roman lands, and once the lands are secure, he can carry on with the expansion east. Will we be able to deal with this Turk army? Find out in the next episode of The Phoenix Rises. In the western expansion, the young Emperor Ioannes continued to find success in his military campaign, bringing the castle of Sofia and the surrounding lands back to the Roman Empire. With the Hungarian alliance securing the empire's northern borders, only the rebel region of Scopia remained before Ioannes could lead the expedition west towards the ancestral lands of his people. Meanwhile, in the east, Alexios Dulcas' capture of Iconion meant several things for the campaign. On the one hand, it was a military success for Alexios, and boosted the troops' morale, securing a victory against the Empire's old foe. But on the other hand, the invasion had stirred the Turkish beast, and therefore started to come dangerously close to Roman lands. Concerned about leaving Iconium before the populace can be settled, Alexios knew that it would be more dangerous to let the Turks attack the eastern lands. He would have to decide the best course of action soon.